Sweet. So we're going to talk about not Node, but that's okay at a Node meetup. People have seen talks from me before. I often ask questions. Who's this guy? Why does Adam have a small shrine to him in his house? So Ryan Dahl was like the principal developer first, but he basically Node is his baby. He invented Node, which is cool. We're all here because of this dude. He also gave a really fascinating talk recently. So has anyone watched this talk? It will, yeah, we'll get there. He gave an amazing talk where he spoke about his regrets about Node. Some interesting things happened as a result. A couple of tech news outlets posted that Ryan Dahl regrets building Node. It's not what he said. He in fact talks about the fact that he used it again recently and quite likes it. But he does something that I think is really interesting. He's a developer who's fucking great, and he talks about the mistakes he made, which is quite rare in development. We're often quite big-headed, so that's cool to see. He also goes in detail through the mistakes he thinks he made very early on, the reasons why they were mistakes, which is fascinating. I'm never going to build a runtime from JavaScript, but I can learn from this, so it's interesting. He also does something really cool at the end where he's like, we made these mistakes, here is a solution for it, which is super interesting. So we're going to talk today about, well, we'll start by talking about the mistakes he talks about, and then we'll talk about his solution. So he goes through these as the mistakes he made. Hilariously, the talk is called 10 Mistakes I Made with Node. He talks about 7 mistakes, so that's fine. He talks about not sticking with promises. So apparently, promises were in the Node spec in 2009. I had never written JavaScript in 2009, so I didn't know this. And they took it out 6 months later. He also talks about security. So one of the cool things about JavaScript is it runs in a sandbox. Node takes that sandbox and gives it access to your entire computer or everything else you have. Not very secure. He then talks about a mistake that is package.json. So he talks about the fact that this is quite a bloated thing. People have added loads of extra stuff in it. It's become complicated. He also talks about the fact that NPM only exists because of Node, which is fair. And NPM, privately owned company, a bit weird. And we're all tied to it, which is not cool. And he also talks about the fact that Node modules is a bit weird. So the fact that when you import something, you go to look in Node modules first, that's weird. It's not very declarative. It's a bit magic. And we all kind of take it for granted. We all know that's how it works. And we're like, that's fine. That's just JavaScript. But it's not JavaScript. It's a weird Node thing. He then also regrets the fact that you can just import a thing without an extension. Who uses this all the time? Who exploits this? Yeah, I do too. I have, in front end, we have files with our components. They each have an index.js that just exports the component because I'm lazy and want to write less code. But it means the code's not readable. It means I need to understand weird things about how Node does things as opposed to the way JavaScript does things. So he regrets that. And he also regrets the index.js. He really nicely in the talk calls it cute. He talks about the fact that he was like, oh, index.html is cute. Let's make index.js. It's the same thing. But it's the same problem, right? It's non-declarative. You have to know some magic that is Node-y and not JavaScript-y. And actually, that's kind of the theme that runs through his regrets. He is talking about the fact that the language is less readable because it does clever things. And then the final one, so I think Beth mentioned Node.js earlier. Does anyone know what Node.js is? It's the thing I know on my machine that occasionally errors with Node Sass. That's all I know, and I reinstall everything, and it's all fine. But the only thing he says that needs fixing in Node is the build process. So Node.js is only used by Node. No one else uses it. It's a mess. It's written in Python. He regrets the fact that they're stuck with that. And as I said, beyond just going, these are all things that are a bit of a mistake, whatever, he then presents a solution, which is this thing. He also calls it Deno. He is wrong. I don't care if he invented it. It's pronounced Deno. Who's heard of this? Hands up. Who's played with this? Amazing. I had a horrible feeling I'd give the talk and everyone was like, yeah, we're running this in production. I don't know what you're talking about here. It's not exciting. So he started building a new runtime for JavaScript, which is very cool. So we're going to look at some examples. We'll see how this goes. What could go wrong, hey? So we have a couple of different examples that we'll step through. So the security point is quite interesting. Let's start with a really basic example. Can everyone read this? Is it big enough? Should it be bigger? It can be bigger. Oh my God. Oh, it looks massive on my machine. But anyway. So here's a really basic example. Obviously, we have to start with hello world. And to run this, you just do dino run, when I'm in the right directory. One-handed programming, not fun. So dino run runs my code, and I just give it a file to run. Cool, does the thing. And you'll be like, this is just Node, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, but if we try and do something more interesting, then we'll start seeing some of the differences. So here we have something that's slightly more interesting. We have a file that imports a local JavaScript file I've got. As you can see, I have to use my extension. Fine. We've also got a file I'm importing from the internet. And so the way Dino does module resolution is you point at some source code, and Dino has their own repository, and it's actually just stored as a single file, and you can import it from the web. And the reason Ryan talks about why he thinks this is the correct way of doing it is because this is what browsers do. And so part of what Dino does is kind of pulls JavaScript back to being browsery. Like Node is a departure from that. He starts pulling it back slightly, which is cool. And so I can run this, and it does the things I'd expect. It's not very exciting code. Oh, this is actually just what the code does. So I've already compiled this, but if actually we ran it clean, you'd see it pulling down the stuff from the web, and all of my modules live there. It caches them locally for me, but I don't have a node modules file anymore. There are some interesting questions about like, how do I do version control? Like, how do I update my packages? And like, I'm pointing at a specific version, so that's cool. But then if I've got an app using like 100 things I'm importing, how do I manage that? I don't know, he doesn't know. We'll find out, right? So we can go to a mildly more interesting example. So this is, mildly more interesting. This is just gonna write some stuff to the file. And what we see happen is Dino goes, whoa, is this allowed to do this thing that you've told it to do? And it has this protocol buffer to pass messages between it, basically saying that it wants to have access to certain things, or it needs this. And so that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing our Dino process go, this thing is not privileged. Are you OK with it saying it? And I can say yes, and that's fine. The problem with this being, if I'm deploying this onto a box, how do I do that? And it's cool. There's like an API, or there's a flag I can pass that's like allow file, and I can give it access to everything if I want, or I can give it access to a specific file. So I can say I want it to have access to hello.txt is what I called it. Whatever. And it's all cool with it. And it writes my file, and I can see my hello text file appear. And if I go, actually I want to call it hello2, and I pass that same flag, it's no longer allowed. Which is cool, right? Like, security is important. It's nice to be able to have a secure runtime. I have a question about this. If I'm deploying something and I want a load of specific permissions, do I have to insert them all in the command line? I hope not. Maybe he'll come up with some config idea. I don't know, we'll find out. There's also some interesting stuff in the API where a process can de-escalate its own privileges, which is also a really nice touch. Like, I can see a bunch of reasons why at boot I might need a load of access that I actually never need once something's running. That's quite cool, so I can have a process start up, then have my Dino process de-escalate its privileges so that it doesn't have access to a load of stuff that it doesn't need to have access to. And you can also build web servers. This is a boring one, so I'll skip over it. We can go to a more interesting one. So, one of the fascinating, cool, not cool, interesting but not surprising things that's happening is loads of people are going, oh, Express is really good. Let's build Express in Dino, which is fine. But so like there is a slew of like clone things being copied across from Node to Dino, and like this is a framework called Pogo that is basically like Express, but there's hundreds, and I can boot up a web server. So I can go back here, and I can say Dino run. What the hell do I call it? Basic.ts. You'll notice these are all TypeScript files, and I'm not writing TypeScript. That's fine. So Dino has TypeScript in the V8 engine, so you can just write TypeScript and it will work, which is quite nice. He loves TypeScript, so that's why. In fact, that was the actual reason he gave, was he thinks TypeScript is beautiful, which is why it uses TypeScript, which is fine. So now I've boosted up a web server. What does it have? It has some endpoints that I can hit. Let's find a browser. Let's hit an endpoint. Oh, fuck. Ooh. Did I call it hello? I probably called it hello, didn't I? Yeah. So I can build an endpoint in Dino. That's pretty cool, right? Bit boring, but that's fine. So let's make a mildly more interesting endpoint. So instead of basic.ts, I threw together this, which is just going to serve me up a React file. And like, as you can see, this looks fairly normal to people, right? Like this isn't crazy. Dino's not changing JavaScript. Some of the import stuff's quite interesting, but like broadly it's the same. There's not a lot to learn, which is nice. So here I've got similarly the same thing. I'm just actually going to use React DOM server to build a page in React, serve it up on /web page. And again, you're seeing this permissions thing, which is like a nice bit of security wrapped around my process. And if I go to this, I can see my web page. So I'd like to welcome you all to the first LDUG meetup, the London Dino user group. We'll be meeting I don't know when we actually meet, Adam. But this is cool. So like I can serve up a React app in Dino. I could hypothetically I haven't got a personal website, build a personal website and then move it to Dino, which is pretty cool, right? And this is something that Ryan's been working on for like 6 to 9 months, very early stage. There are bits of it that are a bit, don't work, but that's fine. So, we spoke about security. We looked at some code. Why am I telling you this? Like, this is not production ready. Please don't use this. It's mildly interesting. I'm interested in this for a couple of reasons. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think something like this has happened where like a language, not a language, but like a runtime has changed. Like there's a really interesting thing that's going to happen where all of the things you're used to using in Node, the packages you install, they don't work here. Pardon? Yeah, fair, yeah. But I'm really intrigued what happens. Like, I'm really intrigued what libraries get moved over, how people actually build things differently. That's interesting. The other thing I'm really intrigued about is the fact that we actually all get to watch the discussions that happen around like, oh, how do I manage an app that wants a load of permissions? Like, how do we deal with that? And how do I manage like upgrading my vendor packages? I think that's really fascinating. Like, if you go to the GitHub repo, you can have a read through the discussions they're having. So you can find Dino at github.com/dinoland/Dino. Dinoland is their website, and it's got loads of really interesting information. Like, everyone, go have a play in this thing. Like, it's very cool that we can try something out very early on. Who here used Node in, like, 2009? Yeah, I knew he would. But this is kind of fascinating. Like, I assume Ryan didn't know what was going to happen with Node. He talks about the fact that he left in 2010, 2011, like, started working on other things because he thought he'd done his thing. Like, he'd made I/O work nicely. You could run a HTTP server. He was kind of done with it. And then here we are like 10 years later with something that is people are using in production, people are making a hell of a lot of money off of. Like, that's weird. It must be odd for him. But we're at the stage where actually we get to go and watch those things happen all over again and get an understanding of how that process is going to work and actually have an input in it ourselves. Like, we can go and have a play around. We can make suggestions. We can talk to them. We can say, it's really weird that I have to put all these allow flags in a fucking command line. Maybe a file would be nice. Maybe we'll call it package.json, Ryan. It'd be great. So my parting message is install it, have a play, build something fun. I actually didn't try deploying anything, but deploy it and tell me how it works. Yeah, Dino, everybody.